I'd whisper. Those are 4 words you don't want to hear in the middle of the night. Images of a home invasion raced through my mind. Shots fired, our children and my pregnant wife dead in their beds. But when I strained to listen, all I heard was the sound of someone crying. Man or woman, child or adult, I couldn't be sure. Only one thing I knew, it was coming from right under our window. Is there someone out there? Emily called from the bed. I don't know. Despite the sound, when I squinted into the gray shadows, I couldn't see anyone. I'm going to check, I said, heading for the door. No. Stay here, we'll call the police. Some people use recordings of babies crying to lure people out. I laughed. Where'd you hear that? Forensic files? I swung the door open. First of all, it's not a baby. Second of all, I won't actually go outside. I'll just take a look. I can't see Jack from the window. I went downstairs, armed with nothing more than a cell phone. But when I shined the light around through the windows, I didn't find anyone. The crying, however, continued. Now it sounded like it was coming from the forest surrounding our backyard, just past the tree line. And to me, it sounded like a woman's cries, too restrained to be a child's. From experience with my kids, I know crying usually proceeds to full-out bawling in 10 seconds, and too soft and high-pitched to be a man's. I pulled open a window, cupped my hands, and called out, "Hey! Do you need help?" The crying sound stopped immediately. But she didn't reply. No other sounds came from the forest, save for the wind rustling through the trees. "Hello?" I yelled. "Anyone out there?" A beat of silence. Then she started screaming. Blood-curdling shrieks. Over and over. No words, no cries for help. Just screaming. That pushed me into action. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. There's a woman screaming in my backyard. I think she's hurt, or in danger. She won't respond to me. My address is 20 Petunia Avenue. The stairs creaked as my wife rushed down. "Did you call the police?" I nodded. "Oh my God, what the hell is going on out there?" She kept her hand protectively over her belly, as if to shield our unborn child from whatever horrors lay outside. My hand reached for the glass door. What if someone is killing her? Right now? Or what if she's being abducted, and they'll both be gone by the time the police are here? Emily yanked me back. "No. You're not going out there." "But..." She pulled the door shut and locked it. "You could get killed." Thankfully, the police arrived a minute or two later. As they walked into the backyard, the screaming cut off suddenly. Their flashlights scanned through the trees as they searched, lighting the leaves in white. 20 minutes later, they came back empty-handed. "Probably what you heard was the foxes," the officer said. "They've got this crazy mating call that sounds just like a woman screaming." "But I heard her crying." "Look it up online," he said, with a smile. "I've been fooled by it too. They sound just like a woman screaming her lungs out. It's insane." By the time we climbed back in bed, the gray light of dawn was spreading over the horizon. When I couldn't sleep, I took the officer's advice and looked up fox sounds. Apparently, they do make a sound that sounds pretty similar to a woman screaming. Convincing myself that's all it was, I fell asleep. But the next night, it happened again. 4 a.m., on the dot. The soft crying, coming from the forest. I called the police again yet again, they found nothing. They also warned me not to call them over the crying again, unless things got worse. And so I didn't call them when it happened the next night. And the next. And the next. I chalked it up to the foxes, even though they only made screaming sounds, not crying. I forced myself to fall back asleep every time. We invested in a heavy-duty white noise machine. Bought fans, too, for good measure. Turned everything up to full blast and, for about a week, we all slept like babies. Thankfully, the kids' rooms didn't face the backyard, so they never heard a thing. Then the night of August 24th happened. The night started out well. Emily and I got the kids to sleep early, and we cuddled in bed for a long time, longer than we had in weeks. "Our little Ellie," I said, skimming my hand across her belly. Despite her being 5 months pregnant, there was barely a bump there. "Are you sure you're eating enough?" "I'm fine," she replied, pulling my hand into hers and giving it a squeeze. "I just don't want to gain so much weight, like I did the last 2 times." "You know I think you're beautiful at any weight, right?" I asked. "You don't need to do this for me." "I'm not." She smiled, and closed her eyes. "I love you, Harry." "I love you, too." We fell asleep in each other's arms. only to be woken a few hours later by the crying. It was louder. Much louder. So loud I could hear it over the white noise. As I tossed and turned my way out of a deep sleep, and pulled myself out of bed, I realized why. It wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from our closet. I immediately shut off the white noise and got out of bed. "Who's there?" I yelled, my hand firmly on my phone, ready to dial 911. No response. Just more halting sobs, shuddering breaths, soft sniffles. "What's going on?" Emily asked, sleepily. "There's someone in the closet." I turned my phone's flashlight on. The light twinkled in the darkness, bouncing off the metal doorknob. "Emily, call the police," I said, advancing towards the door. I heard the soft sounds of the dialed tone behind Meth in Emily's hurried voice. "We're calling the police," I said. "Tell me who you are." More sobbing. I charged up to the door. I grasped the doorknob. With a deep breath, I twisted and pulled. A terrified woman looked up at me. It was Emily. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her face was wet with a never-ending stream of tears. But it was, without a doubt, my wife. She sobbed, over and over, as she stared up at me. As if she weren't quite registering who I was. Then I looked down, and my blood ran cold. Her hands rested on her stomach. Her round, protruding stomach. She was visibly pregnant. "Harry?" Emily called from the bed. "Is everything okay?" I looked down at the crying woman. Her sobs were silent. Now, she just stared up at me, silently, tears in her eyes. "Harry?" Emily said, more insistently this time. I slowly shut the door. My hands were shaking, my legs were weak. When I turned around, Emily was sitting on the edge of the bed, her brown eyes locked intently at me. "The closet was empty," I said. I walked back over to the bed, nearly fainting in the process, and sat down next to her. I must have just imagined it. "Ah, Harry," she said, wrapping an arm around me. I flinched at her touch. "This whole thing has been stressing you out, huh?" I nodded. 3 knocks on the door broke through the quiet. "Will you go let them in?" "I would, but I'm not dressed," she said with a light giggle, hands trailing over her silky chemise. I didn't move from the bed. "Harry?" No. There was no way I was leaving her alone in the bedroom while I went downstairs. "I'd go down, but I don't feel so good," I lied. "I think I just need to lie down. Will you handle it?" She paused, staring into my eyes. Then she finally nodded. She got off the bed, pulled on a bathrobe, and headed towards the door. As soon as she disappeared from sight, I ran to the closet. She was still there. The woman who looked just like my wife, sitting on the floor, silently crying. The woman who was my wife. I don't know how I knew she was the right one, I just did. It was something intangible, a gut feeling, that I can't put into words. I crouched down and laid my hand on her shoulders. "Emily. Emily, can you hear me?" Her eyes stared blankly into mine. Tears streamed down her face. "What happened to you?" She didn't reply. Voices murmured downstairs. Heavy footsteps resonated through the house. We were running out of time. I grabbed her hand. "You have to come with me. Now." She slowly, shakily, stood up. I pulled her out of the bedroom, and we softly entered the hall. Making our way to our kids' room. Downstairs, the lights were on. Emily was turned away from us, talking to the 2 policemen in dark outfits. "We can't let her see us." Silence. "Don't make a sound. Don't even." Emily suddenly let go of my hand. She ran. Her footsteps thundered across the hall as she sprinted into our kids' room. "Emily, no," I whispered. As I ran after her, I glanced down the staircase. Emily was staring at us. So were the police officers. Their hands were on their guns. That's when I realized that Emily hadn't been calling 911 at all. She'd been calling for backup. I dove into our kids' bedroom. My wife was already crouched over Abby and Mark, sobbing uncontrollably. And for the first time since I found her, she was speaking, muttering the same 3 words, over and over. "I love you." I helped them out of bed. "Abby. Mark. We need to go. Now." They sleepily followed me towards the door, my wife trailing behind them. I opened the door. Emily stood in front of us. The 2 policemen stood behind her, guns raised. "Run," I said to Emily. It was a risk. A huge one. They could shoot all of us in an instant. But, for some reason, they didn't. We ran down the stairs, and they chased after us. But no shots were fired. We were alive. As we ran out the door, I grabbed our car keys from the hook. Then we were pulling out of the driveway. The three of them stood in the doorway, watching us. Guns still raised, yet never pulling the trigger. "Abby, Mark, are you okay?" I asked as we pulled onto the highway. "Daddy, what's happening?" Abby asked. "Are we in trouble?" Mark asked. "We're okay now," I said. We reported everything to the police, but by the time they arrived at the house, it was empty. No trace of the woman I'd called my wife for months. No trace of the two police officers, either. We quickly sold the house and moved several states away. Emily recovered very slowly, but she didn't seem to sustain any permanent damage. In time, she eventually told me what happened. "It was a few months ago, about a month after we got pregnant," she said, her hands shaking as she picked up her cup of tea. "I got up to use the bathroom, and I heard someone outside. Someone crying for help. I went to the back door, opened it, and called out to see if they needed help. Then, I don't remember." "I'm so sorry," I said, squeezing her hand. "I kept waking up in the woods. Every time I did, I tried to make my way back to you. But all I could do was cry, and scream. It was like my mind was too foggy to form words. I must have been drugged, or something." She squeezed my hand back. "All I could think about was you. Getting back to you, and Abby, and Mark. When I found the door unlocked one night, I walked up to our bedroom. And then, I don't remember, but I must have gotten scared, because I found myself in the closet, hiding away from you and that woman's voice. Unable to stop crying." "I'm just glad you're back," I said, wrapping her in my arms and holding her tight. "Now, it's been almost a year since Emily and I got away. While life has been wonderful, and baby Leah is the sweetest thing, annoying fear has settled in my stomach. I've tried to ignore it and pass it off as stress. Anxiety. Fear. One of those haunting thoughts born out of terror, rather than logic. But the more time that passes, the harder it is to ignore. Our two other kids, Abby and Mark. They haven't grown an inch since we moved here.